to Akulmach, and today in our literature section, we are joined by Professor G. Revati, and we are discussing about the rise of English language during Celtic era. So, without wasting any further moment, let's welcome G. Revati, ma'am, who is working as professor in a prominent college in Hyderabad.
Welcome to the show, Revati madam. It is so wonderful to really talk to you because I know the way you know the literature, the way you teach the literature is so wonderful. So today I will be actually asking you so many interesting questions, especially about English language. So welcome to the show, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving this opportunity. Yes.
So, Revati madam, you know that languages are really, these are actually inventions. Many wise people have developed these languages. And when we are talking about English language, it is one language which is spoken, I think whole of the world is speaking. So I actually very much interested that can you really tell me how the rise of English language happens?
English language, basically the contemporary language of now, has become a global language. In fact, if you look at the origin of this English language, it's quite kind of amazing. As such, if you look at old English language, it hardly matches with the new language. But still, how it emerged, we will look at the history of this Old English language. Okay, so I think around 5th century, where some of the tribes from West Germanic people, like Angles, Saxons, Jutes, they've invaded the so-called Britain. And earlier, the original inhabitants of this place were Brythons and Celts. So these people, during their invasion, they have actually, they have brought down this Roman rule completely. So they have invaded, they have occupied, and with them, they came up with West Germanic language, which is called the English. And that is why, and when people have come and settled here in this place, they have called it as England, because the Angles have come and settled. And they called it as Anglaland. And over the period of time, it became England. And the language they brought with was the English. It was not pronounced as English as such, but then later it has become the language of English. And that is how it all started. That is how it took its birth, the language English. And basically, these three tribal people were warriors, they were invaders, they were thiefers. So that is how they have sensed that this is such a land where it was quite fertile, and they wanted to kind of, occupy this land, and that is how they've come. And from there itself, in fact, English language has originated, but it is not the same language as we have it now. It was a combination of Celtic, and it was and the language which is called the English of the West Germanic tribes, put together, it was called as an Old English language. Okay, and people started, bringing out literature in this so-called Old English. But basically, there was none to write this Old English. First and foremost, it was because there were no scientific inventions during advancement during that period. And not just that, there was no printing press or something like that to document their, the written work. There was absolutely no written work at all done during that period. It was only the oral rendition. Whatever they have narrated in the form of words was documented, and they have written it down. And that is how the literature started growing.
Well, every language has a wonderful beginning, and English do have a wonderful commencement, and how it is originated and how it is developed. So much so that it has become a prominent language in the modern era. But when we talk about, suppose I take an example of Hindi or Hindi literature. So we know there's Pali language, then it is Sanskrit, and then it originated into modern combination of Bhojpuri and Sanskrit became kind of Hindi language. But we do have a sound literature that is kind of from antiquity. We know that these literatures are Upanishads are there. So likewise, do we have the literature in that particular Celtic era? And when we are talking about English language, do we have?
Yes, yes, we do have. As I told you, it was in fact transmitted orally. Okay, and there were a lot of, I mean, the kind of literature we come across during Old English period is mostly the heroic kind of poetry, and which was pre-Christian period. And then you have poems written during Christian period also. This is when I talk about Christianity. There was one monk called Saint Augustine who had come from Rome to spread this on a mission of spreading Christianity. And then this spreading of Christianity and brought down this Christianity to Anglo-Saxon people, and people were converted into Christians. And from then on, it has a huge impact on literature. And the literature prior to it mostly consisted heroic kind of poetry or prose, and then post the Christianity, most of the poetry encompassed a lot of Christian elements into it. So, of course, there was quite a good amount of literature which was brought out during this period. To name one, I think Beowulf, which is the ancient Old English poem. It's an epic, actually. It's a huge, lengthy kind of poem. The saddest part is, it was again an oral transmission where nobody knows who the author was and I mean, who actually had written it down. But it is very much, it's taken up in a manuscript. It is preserved in a manuscript. This is about a hero and how he fights against a monster. Monsters called the Grendel and its mother, and then a fire-breathing dragon. So this is one literature, one part of it. Then when it comes to, say, for example, you have the Christianity thing and the elements which are, you come across in certain poems written by Kedman and Kenwolf. Okay, these are again two prominent poets during that period. They have brought out, and one important feature about these two people, the two poets, are Kedman was not so educated. He was an illiterate. In spite of that, because of the divine intervention, one fine day he actually started reciting few verses from the Bible. Now, Kedman, most of the times he picked up a lot of material into his poetry from the Old Testament of the Bible, whereas Kenwolf, poet, not much is known about him. But he was a kind of a sophisticated kind of a poet. And one thing, we could figure out the poetry written by Kenwolf by his runic signature after every poetry. This was a speciality of this poet. And so when you come across, and again, when you talk about the prose, okay, then prose also had come in by King Alfred. He was a king of Wessex. He was a man who had, he was a scholar, an educationist. He promoted a lot of education in his period during that time, and he was the man who had brought out Chronicle, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, where it had a lot of events in a chronological order, and that was the prose, the important prose which has come down. And all these things we usually we come to know about this from the book which is written by Bede. It's like ecclesiastical history of English people. This is where we get a lot of information from. Now, this book actually was written in Latin, but King Alfred had translated it into English for the convenience of the other people of the Anglo-Saxon period. And well, there were quite a good number of poems when it comes to the religion aspect. We come across Dream of the Rood, where it's kind of a poem which is revolving around the Christ and cross, and how he gets a dream, a vision of the rood is nothing but it's a rod. Rod, as in Old English, it means a pole. So he tries to describe how this pole, which is made out of wood, also kind of, it takes up the, crucifixion of the Jesus Christ along with it, and has no complaint about us. And so this is one poem which talks about that, the importance of Christ and the symbol of the cross. And then we also come across something called Hymn, where it is again written by Kedman. He, again, as I told you, that because of the intervention of the divine intervention, he had come up with this verse form. So he had penned it down, and after which he had become the minstrel of the court, a scop. There he went on producing an n number of poetry. But it was again, most of the time it was oral, and later a few of them were documented, and they were kind of stored in 4 manuscripts, and then these are the 4 manuscripts which we come across are the Vitellius and the Junius, the Exeter book, and the Vercelli book. These are the 4 manuscripts where most of the poetries are preserved. Okay.
That's a wonderful kind of all stretch and the history and the literature which you have mentioned, and there are few which I had no idea, but it was so wonderful. Now I just want to ask you that what is the impact of that Celtic era of literature to the modern literature? When we actually, as a student, I have read only the modern literature of English language, and this is the first time we are talking about the Celtic English literature. And you see, the Celtic literature is some, because there I have heard and I have read that there are few things are known about the Celtic era, but the literature is still prolonged, and we know little bit about literature of English language. So what is the impact of this? And if you have anything handy, maybe 4 or 5 lines of that prose or poem, if you can recite, that will be wonderful. If you don't have, that's okay. But I just want to discuss the effect of into the modern literature of the Celtic literature.
Right. When we talk about this Old English period, the literature of it, it is actually the mirror of the society at that period or the point of time. Now, when you look back, when I keep on mentioning about the periods, let me also tell you about something called we should be knowing about the 8 periods in the age of the literature. Like a human being has different ages, isn't it? A childhood or an infancy, childhood, adulthood, and so on. Even these, periods are they're demarcated for the literature too. Now, the impact of the old literature, when you read it, you actually get to know the society at that point of time. What was the mindset of the people, and how did people actually dwell, and what kind of a unity they had, and what sort of the entire picture about the society is reflected in the literature. Now, in the modern age, when you look back to, so that is the reason why whenever we read literature is just a piece of text. So you have to know context. So the piece of literature in the context, how did it, what exactly things it is showing? What other things are reflected in that? Now, taking those, you can, probably imply to the modern literature too. Now, if you look back to the olden literature, they at least had the verse forms. They maintained this kind of alliteration, and they had something called, different metaphors, similes. But again, come back to the modern thing, you actually, kind of omit most of the things. You come up with blank verses of poetry. And then when you talk about the impact, yes, we can pick up a lot many things, and probably we may not repeat the mistakes looking at the literature of that particular era. So as it grows, as the period or the age keeps growing, the literature also keeps growing. And when you look back, it's like, as good as reading your own diary. I mean, you get to know, like, what is it and what are the things we have to avoid? What are the things we can incorporate with our, as the political system, probably, or anything for that matter. So, and that is how such an interesting thing about the periods is either they named according to the rulers, or the major writers of that period, or the major events of that period. So looking back to the literature, you will definitely understand, oh, that was the period where this was the movement which went on, or that was the period when this is how the ruler was, and such things we get to know, because literature itself reflects a lot about whatever is going on in the society at that point of time.
Okay, Riti ma'am, it was so wonderful to really discuss this topic, because I'm sure that our viewers may not be knowing the rise of English language, though we have been speaking English language for such a long time, and most of the people speak English. So the rise of English is very wonderful topic, and I will be taking up a few finer points in our next episode. And today we have discussed how this originated through German, through Denmark, people who invaded. So it was so wonderful, and I look forward for the comments and opinion of our viewers on this episode, and I will be looking forward to you in the next episode and discuss more wonderful things about English language and languages.
We had a wonderful discussion with Mrs. G. Revati, and we discussed the rise of English literature during Celtic era. I look forward for your comments, your opinion, and do you have any question, please do forward, and I will be looking forward for you to join me in next episode. Till then, bye bye, and you take care.